did it automatically. Okay, give it a minute.
Good morning, good afternoon. We'll start in just a minute or two. Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this webinar, Embarking on the 2025 Pilgrimage of Hope for Creation webinar. We're very pleased that you're here with us today. I know that there's lots of weather going around, so it's a good thing that we're inside and looking at this through our screens. And we ask the Lord to bless you as many of you deal with these weather-related events. First, a couple of housekeeping things before we get started with our webinar. We have this session as you know, is going to be recorded. This recording will be sent to you and everyone who has registered in the next day or two. If you are on the session via Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat function. If you wish to direct your question to a specific panelist, do that as well. And we'll be monitoring those questions throughout the course of the hour here. If you are viewing this through YouTube, you will not be able to chat or ask questions, unfortunately. So we apologize for that. With such a large group attending, we will probably not get to all of your questions. So be patient with us, and if you have further questions, you can always email us afterwards. As I said, the chat on the Zoom is for you to chat with others during the session. The Zoom chat should not be used, excuse me, to submit questions. If you're on YouTube, again, you will not have that ability to chat or to ask questions. And as always, remember to be civil in your interactions on chat. So we want this to be a positive experience for everyone. So Pope Francis declared 2025 to be a Jubilee year with a motto, Pilgrims of Hope, and invited us to journey together in faith, caring for creation, working toward justice, and spreading the message that in Christ there is always hope. This first webinar of 2025 seeks to prepare us for the Jubilee year and a new U.S. administration that is already significantly slowing progress on tackling climate change and increasing the current and future threat of the climate crisis. Like many of you, I'm disheartened by the lack of compassion and understanding about the climate and environmental crises by so many, including President Trump. As we know from Laudato Si', this is not only an environmental crisis, nor only a social crisis, but a complex crisis that is both social and environmental. So it will require all of our skill and attention to move humanity to a new place, one that treasures and dignifies both creation and humankind. And at the same time, we are Easter people who know that God is always by our side on our earthly journey. So let us embark together on a pilgrimage for hope for creation. Let's begin with prayer. This prayer is actually written by our very own Paz Artaza Regan after the announcement of the Jubilee of Hope by Pope Francis. Let's quiet ourselves for a moment. And we pray, come, Holy Spirit, illumine us with the light of hope and give us the faith, patience, strength, determination, courage, and grace to hear the cry of creation, gravely damaged by human selfishness, to work to heal, redeem, and renew our common home, to lift up creation's beauty in a prayer of thanksgiving to God, to banish climate despair, to promote peace and reconciliation, to offer signs of hope to migrants, to draw close to those lacking the essentials of life, to never avert our eyes from the faces of our brothers and sisters in need, to defend the rights of those who are most vulnerable, to ensure that the goods of the earth are shared with all, to forgive the debts of countries that will never be able to repay them, to seek justice and mercy for the broken and the lost, to call for acts of clemency and liberation that enable new beginnings, to sow seeds of beauty and kindness, to recover the joy of living, to be singers of abounding hope and generously share with it share it with all of God's beloved children. We pray this in the name of the one who came to bring hope to all creation, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So again, welcome everyone. We are blessed today, especially blessed today, to have Sister Elizabeth Johnson, CSJ. And for most of you, she needs very little introduction. She is a distinguished Professor Emerita of Theology at Fordham University in New York City, a past president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, an award-winning author, the first woman to receive a doctorate in theology from a Roman Catholic Pontifical University, and the recipient of 15 other honorary doctoral degrees in theology, divinity, and the humane letters. She will be followed by Kayla Jacobs, Program Manager of Youth Mobilization and staff here at the Covenant. And she also works with our Encounter program, our advocacy program. Marianne Comfort will be joining us a little bit later. She's the Justice Coordinator for Earth, Anti-Racism, and Women for the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. Anna Johnson, North American Director for Laudato Si movement, can't be with us in person, but we will hear from her in a recorded message about the pilgrimages of hope for creation. So we begin with Sister Elizabeth. So welcome and look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Dan. And let me say hello, everyone. It is a real privilege to join you today. After the presidential election, when Dan Mislet invited me to speak with you, he wrote, and I quote, "We are in dire need of messaging around hope. So many in the faith community feel distraught as we see giant steps backward for our creation care efforts. We need to lift our spirits by focusing on how hope can motivate us into climate action," end quote. Let me say that I share these feelings. There are moments these days when I feel close to despair, knowing the harm that will be done to the whole community of life on Earth, including humans, under this administration. Last year was the hottest year on record. Unchecked global warming threatens the whole human family and all other species. Yet this administration has already pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement and will continue to promote drilling for oil and gas for power and profit. It's sickening. It's heartbreaking. So what does hope mean in the face of this destruction? Let me offer you two thoughts. One about hope in basic human terms, and one from a faith perspective, concluding with how both together can lead us forward. So first of all, from a purely human perspective, let me say this. Think about hope as a muscle of resistance. Let me put this distraught feeling in context. Our American culture rewards success. Many of us engage in a good project with the expectation that given enough elbow grease and money and time, our efforts will produce good results. Many of us don't have a great deal of experience with being thwarted. The spotlight is on success. It's the air we breathe in our culture. But think back to other struggles. Remember the history of our own country and the terrible struggle to abolish slavery, and then the civil rights movement to stop lynching and Jim Crow laws, and to this very day, efforts to turn around violent racist acts. Individual persons and organized groups have met setback after setback, including murder. What keeps the effort going? A deep sense of what is right and true, regardless of what the dominant culture says. And this translates into a strong love that cherishes the dignity of every human person, regardless of the color of their skin. And this translates into action on behalf of justice, even in the face of opposition. You know, the famous freedom song sang, "We shall overcome someday." But those who sang it knew that if they didn't press on now, then we shall overcome never. In a culture that glorifies success, this kind of resistance is countercultural. Barbara Ehrenreich, the columnist and author of Nickel and Dimed about wage inequality in America, put it this way, and this is a great quote, I think. She says, quote, "The idea is not that we will win in our own lifetimes, and that's the measure of us, but that we will die trying." So not that we'll win, but we'll die trying. In other words, the measure of our courage is the measure of our willingness to embrace disappointment, acknowledge the wounds it causes, and then rather than throw up our hands and retreat from further participation, keep on insisting on what is good and possible for the world. Another word for this is hope. Here's another example. When apartheid was the law of the land in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, a black leader, was jailed for decades for advocating equality between the races. In 1987, when I taught there, resistance was boiling over. The government had declared a state of emergency, stationing troops and tanks at major intersections and detaining thousands in prison, including priests for giving homilies against apartheid. In this tense situation, one day in Cape Town, I spotted an amazing graffiti, and Paz is going to put the picture up for us to see. On a pale wall, someone had used thick black paint to write the words "Hang Mandela," and I presumed it was a white person. And someone else had come along with a little pencil and had put on the word "On." Hang on, Mandela. On. What an imaginative act of hope, and it took courage amidst all the soldiers and police presence to do that. On. Hang on. So, in our day, we need to be brutally realistic when facing the damage this incoming administration will do to the environment, to climate, to all living species struggling to survive on a heating planet, and to persons, especially those who are poor. There will be terrible losses. In the face of this, because we love the earth, we need to exercise this muscle of resistance, this hope, which may indeed have grown a little flabby. Obviously, hope is far from simple optimism, thinking that everything will turn out well, because it won't. But it is the certainty that something makes sense to do regardless of how it turns out. To round out this first point, just reflecting on hope in human context, consider the wise words of Václav Havel, former president of Czechoslovakia, who was himself earlier imprisoned for opposition to the communist-led authoritarian state. He mused, And I quote, "Hope is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons." Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, he continued, is not the same as joy that things are going well or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously heading for success, but rather it's an ability to work for something because it is good. In other words, on. So whether people are believers or not, this power, this characteristic of the human heart to be able to hope, to press on regardless, is something that comes with the human spirit. But let me move to my second point, that in a faith community, we hope, we exercise this muscle, because we trust that despite the odds, the living God is with us and is faithful. As you know, we live in an evolving world that is not yet finished. Suffering, struggle, and death are everywhere, as are also beauty, goodness, and new life. Believers in the living God are not excused from this ongoing conflictual condition. And for some strange reason, some of us tend to forget this, approaching God with the expectation that if we are good, all troubles will magically be taken away and difficulties resolved. To the contrary, let us dwell for a moment on the biblical story of the burning bush in the book of Exodus, which I think is pivotal for the meaning of hope. When the story opens, the Hebrew people are enslaved in Egypt. In exile in the desert, Moses encounters the Holy One in a fiery bush. He hears the divine voice out of the fire say that God sees the misery of the people, hears their cries, knows what they are suffering, and therefore has come to deliver them by sending Moses to tell Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And when Moses inquires of this voice from the bush, "What's your name, so I can tell people who sent me?" God reveals the divine name, Yahweh, we would say in English. Traditionally, it was translated, "I am who I am." More recent biblical scholars translate this name more dynamically, quote, "I will be with you," a relational, intersubjective meaning of the name of God. In other words, this is a God who will accompany Moses and walk with the people in the struggle to be free. Now, the exchange at the burning bush sears into consciousness a truth that is always and everywhere the case. The living God is present amid suffering with the intent to heal, redeem, and liberate. Write this truth large against the struggle of all human beings. And because God is faithful to all of beloved creation, write it large against the community of life on earth. In creating the world, God is present here and now to each creature, loving it into existence and promising its future. And when trouble comes, the Creator does not turn tail and flee. Ever faithful, the living God does not abandon the beloved creatures, but is present in the midst of the suffering, calling all into the future with the promise of something more, walking with the pain into the future. Now that's the burning bush, but widening our scope to survey the whole Bible, it's extraordinary. How many groups of people, leaders, prophets, poor individuals cry out in distress? A multitude of psalms carry the laments of people in trouble, run ragged by their enemies, out of resources, crying out for help. Out of the depths I cry to you, O God. So being a believer in God does not remove us from this conflictual world, but it does give us a resource, the grace of a basic trust that the great Creator God who made heaven and earth is an infinite ocean of love who is with us in the midst of disaster to help and save. In the New Testament, the letter to the Hebrews calls this basic trust in God hope and likens it to an anchor, a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, to quote Hebrews chapter 6. Picture how an anchor holds a boat in place despite the stormy winds and waves that rock and swing it around. The anchor of an abiding trust in God holds us steady through life's storms. Now, having hope at this perilous moment in our nation's history means anchoring our life, our heart, our actions in the living God who is with us. Far from naive optimism or wishful thinking on the one hand, or despair and withdrawal on the other hand, this hope grounds us in divine faithfulness, letting this anchor keep us steady as we press on regardless. Only a month ago, we celebrated Christmas. It is a wondrous story. The Messiah born in a stable, honored by angels, shepherds, and magi, following a star. In Matthew's Gospel, though, the birth story ends in a terrifying way. The new parents with their baby flee as refugees to a foreign land to escape the jealousy of a murderous king, while all the little 2-year-old boys left behind are murdered. Needless to say, this does not get enacted in most school Christmas pageants. But note that there is conflict and suffering, even disaster, from the beginning of Jesus' story. And the story ends in conflict too, on a cross. Jesus dying in agony with a terrifying cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Christians have a belief, radical belief, that the story does not end there. In death, Jesus dies not into nothingness, but into the embrace of the living God, who, in a new act of creation, gifts him with new life. And so at Easter we sing, He is risen. The resurrection of the crucified is God's surprising, compassionate act of fidelity to one person as promise for all the world. So yes, things fall apart, but I will be with you is the proper name of the creator of heaven and earth. And so we hope, with the gospel at high noon on Christmas Day, which proclaims, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So to bring these two ideas together, where both human capacity for hope and faith grounding of hope in God, where do they together lead us? I suggest they lead us to generative action. Yes, in our day, we need to be prepared for a long and challenging struggle against harmful ecological moves initiated by this administration. How we choose to respond will determine our own lives and something of the future of the world itself. Total discouragement will destroy our capacity to do anything. But exercising the hopeful muscle of resistance, grounded by the anchor of trust in God who loves the earth and is walking with us, will generate tough, loving actions that at least have the possibility of sending this spinning world in an even slightly better direction. A beautiful image in a poem by Marge Percy captures the dynamism of this undertaking. And she writes in just a small snip here of one of her poems. We must shine with hope, stained glass windows that shape light into icons, glow like lanterns borne before a procession. Who can bear hope back into the world but us? End of her poem. Note that this is more than an individual calling. Collectively, our light can shape icons that comfort and protect. And in solidarity with other civic and religious groups, supporting each other and loving the natural world, the Catholic Climate Covenant can shine like a glowing lantern processing into the darkness. So, to conclude, do not stop loving. Be good human beings. Be good Catholics. As good human beings, exercise hope, that muscle of resistance. And as believers in God, creator of heaven and earth, who walks with people in trouble, act responsibly for eco-justice in the midst of the mess. Thereby, we actively participate in God's redemptive work in the world. I'd like to let the Apostle Paul then have the last word. I quote from his letter to the Romans. Hope does not disappoint because the love of God has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit given to us. So go and do. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone on this webinar that we are so glad you said yes to this opportunity. That was just beautiful, Sister Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I took a bunch of notes, so I may use some of those for questions later on. But let's turn to Kayla Jacobs, who will talk a little bit about our Encounter program, our advocacy program, and how we think that our direction ought to be more at the state level. So Kayla, go ahead.
That was awesome, Sister Beth. I'm very inspired, so thank you. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Kayla, the staff lead for the Covenant's Encounter for Our Common Home Network. Encounter is our advocacy network, for those of you who don't know. It was started a couple years ago with the intention to bring together U.S. Catholics to urge government and church leaders to support climate solutions in a time where we so obviously desperately need it. Our Encounter network meets on the last Wednesday of every month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. During those meetings, we share policy updates and briefings, and event information. We provide training and resources, and we also have time for like small group discussions to connect with other folks in the network and share ideas. Another benefit of Encounter is that many of our partner organizations are also part of the network. So when you go to the meetings, you won't only hear updates from the Covenant, but also other Catholic organizations who are working on climate. Historically, the Covenant has focused on federal policy, and while we're still committed to putting pressure on Congress and the administration, we also realize that it's important for us to shift some of our energy to state level policy in the hopes that we'll get more wins on the state level in the next couple of years. So we're already starting this in a few different ways. One of the first steps we're taking on the state level with our partner Laudato Si movement is a letter to governors across the country to encourage them to support and sign climate legislation. We will send an action alert to the governor's letter in the webinar follow-up email. So keep your eyes peeled for that and send a letter to your governor. We're also just starting to develop state level leadership. We're calling these people our state captains, and these people will lead their fellow Catholic advocates in their state and research bills to support. And then in my other role for the Covenant, in the youth mobilization program, the high school students in our program will engage in state level lobby days in the coming months. There's one in Massachusetts, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Yeah, so I know many of you on the call are already part of Encounter, but if you're not and you're interested, I will add the link to sign up in the chat. And by signing up, you'll receive the invitations to our meetings and notes and recordings of the meetings, action alerts, and updates. So while it's been a tough couple of days for climate policy-wise, I'm really grateful for the Jubilee of Hope to keep us inspired during these tough times. And I'm also really grateful for all of you who are working to protect the earth and the humans and the creatures who dwell on it. I recently had the privilege of moderating a panel on advocacy. The panel was of 3 high school students who are in our youth mobilization program. And at the end, I asked them, what about doing advocacy gives them hope? And they all had the same answer. And that answer was the community that they advocate with. So thank you all for being part of our advocacy community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And yeah, as she said, those links will be put in the chat. So go visit your chat, and you can go ahead and click on that link, and it'll be ready for you when the webinar is over. I'd like to welcome Marianne Comfort into the conversation now. Marianne is a dear friend, as well as just an amazing advocate for many issues, including environmental justice, and she comes to us through the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. So Marianne, go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for the invitation. I'm actually right now at the Cannon Office Building, one of the legislative buildings on the U.S. Capitol. So if you hear a little background, I apologize. And I just got back from a strategy meeting with a lot of our interfaith partners, the various groups here in Washington, D.C. that work together to bring the moral and faith voice to members of Congress in the administration. And I'm here to tell you that we had a lot of energy and a lot of hope of things that we can be doing, and wanted to share that with you. One of the big areas, of course, is talking about protecting some of the pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act and the investments in clean energy technology. And one of our colleagues with the Quakers has this long list of all the representatives in Republican representatives in districts that have really benefited from these clean energy investments. Their economy is improving, they're having more jobs because of these investments. So we are going to be talking to these legislators, and probably it'll trickle down to all of you to talk to these legislators and encourage them to keep these investments in these communities. And we want to shine a light on some of these benefits and show that these clean energy investments are really impacting in a very positive way local communities. Another area of work is, you've probably heard that President Trump has announced an energy emergency. And so this is a declaration where he's saying he wants to open up a lot more oil and gas drilling and a lot more mining of what are called critical minerals, which can be used both for the energy transition and also for the military. And so there is going to be a lot of work to try to keep the environmental safeguards, make sure that permitting for these projects go through environmental reviews, that there's community consultation, that the communities that are going to be most impacted by these projects have a say. And we know that by declaring a climate emergency, an energy emergency, the president is hoping to do an end run and shortcut a lot of those processes. One of the first things that was done was to end the pause that the Biden administration had on liquefied natural gas export terminals, or LNG terminals. And we know that a lot of communities along the Gulf Coast have been advocating very strongly to reject these permits of these facilities. These are communities that already are having a lot of pollution from these facilities, and they do not want any more of them there. So we are going to be having some solidarity work to do with communities that are finding themselves threatened by even more of these polluting industries. So we'll be doing that. And then there will be some opportunities for bipartisan efforts. Many of you have heard me talk before about the Forest Act, which was a bill that would bar imports into the U.S. of illegally deforested goods. So goods like cocoa, beef, soy would be barred into the US if they are being deforested in a way that is deemed illegal in their own countries. And we know that there are some Republicans and Democrats who are supporting these kind of measures. So that is, something that we hope we can do across party lines. So that's just a few of the things that we're working on here in Washington, D.C., and that we'll be looking to all of you to be joining us in advocacy for the greatest impact and the greatest benefit for our creation and for our neighbors.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Wow, on the job report from the Capitol, amazing. Thank you for jumping in and joining us and giving us some ideas. I want to flag for people that the list of Inflation Reduction Act benefits by state was just posted in the chat. So scroll up and you'll see that. I think it was Minette So that's who posted it. That's from the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is one of the groups that provides really good information. And I think that's an excellent strategy to call your member of Congress and say, hey, these things are really doing wonders for our community. So let's not let this sunset. There's a lot of other legal things around whether the administration can actually stop this. Right now, there's a 90-day pause on IRA funds. So it may, during that period, they're going to be reviewing what to do. But I think there's certainly going to be a lot of pushback legally, as well as other ways to keep these funds flowing to the states and the districts. So we have a video. Anna Johnson from Laudato Si movement is actually in the air, coming to DC for the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering meeting. So she was not able to join us from the airplane. She did the next best thing and sent us a video. So let's play that, and then we'll go back and try to answer a few of your questions. So Paz, you want to run that tape?
Hello, my name is Anna Johnson, and I work with the Laudato Si movement. It is my great honor to be here with you all today. Thank you for this opportunity. I am really excited to share with you this incredible initiative that's coming out of many different organizations across the United States, different Catholic organizations, who are all saying this ecological crisis is moving so quickly. We are so out of right relationship with God's creation. It's time for us to do something together. It's time for us to do something differently. And this is our initiative, the 2025 Pilgrims of Hope for God's Creation. You might be saying, Anna, we are in the midst of a crisis. Southern California is on fire. The South is frozen. North Carolina is still recovering from the flooding. There are crises happening across the globe. Why are we being called to pilgrimage in this crisis? Someone named Gus Speth, who is a senior advisor on the ecological crisis to presidents for decades, said, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those issues, we need a spiritual and a cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. This is our time. This is our call. This is our invitation into this opportunity to move into a spiritual and cultural transformation. And how do we do this is by inviting people on pilgrimage. And why this year? This year is such an incredible opportunity to do this. It is the Spirit-driven year where we are seeing this conflux of anniversaries coming together, where we know that the Spirit is absolutely walking with us through this crisis, through the realities that we are facing. It is not only a Jubilee year, an incredibly profound and beautiful biblical tradition of being called into right relationship with the land and with each other. It is also the 10-year anniversary of Laudato Si, this landmark encyclical calling us to care for creation and care for each other. And the 800-year anniversary of St. Francis's Canticle of the Creatures, this incredible prayer inviting us to remember that we are in deep relationship with all of God's creation. Pope Benedict XVI said, to go on pilgrimage really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God where he has revealed himself, where his grace has shone with particular splendor. I invite you to take a moment and think, where in your life do you see particular splendor? For me, it's along the banks of the Cowlitz River in Washington State. There are so many places, though, around the world, local to where you are, where God's grace shines with this particular splendor. And so we are inviting Catholics to call each other out into pilgrimage to open this opportunity for this ecological conversion, to connect the amazing number of Catholics who are concerned for our common home. There are so many of us out here, and so let's work together in a new way to offer this opportunity of ecological connection to our larger Catholic communities and to grow this movement of people being connected and caring for our common home. So who are we asking to organize these? You, me, all of us, Catholics who care for our common home. Wherever makes sense in your local community, whether that be a site of incredible beauty or a site of ecological destruction, or a cathedral, or anything in between. What is this? A pilgrimage? It can be something entirely new. It can be an event or a program you already put on and pulling in this opportunity and this aspect of being a pilgrimage of hope for creation. We hope that this happens during the season of creation, September 1st to October 4th, but this is flexible, taking from 10 minutes to days to months. Who knows what makes sense for your reality and your community. Integrating other initiatives, if discerned through prayer and in community, by all means, whether that be advocacy, whether that be a Eucharistic pilgrimage, or anything that comes to you through that spirit-driven creativity. One specific request that we do have for you is that you're in conversation with local frontline and most impacted communities as you do this. Some examples already out there. Border to the Salton Sea, a site of ecological disaster in Southern California. To the Capitol in Sacramento, a youth-led advocacy to do a youth-led pilgrimage to do a day of advocacy. A rosary walk through parish grounds, a Eucharistic pilgrimage, a 12-mile walk to a mission church with students and friends, a bishop-led journey to a mission, a journey to a mountaintop removal site, anything in between. These are just a few examples, and hopefully it's starting to spark your imagination. We will have a launch call on February 18th where we will be sharing a lot of resources and a lot of other opportunities for how you do this. But until then, please spend some time in prayer. Start opening the conversation with your friends, your colleagues, the other people who you work in caring for creation with around this idea. Where would you want to go? Who would you want to invite to pilgrimage with you? And what are you feeling called to around being hopeful for God's creation and with God's creation this year? Thank you so much for this time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We can't wait to see you in February.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks. So a lot of information. There's several good questions in the chat. I just am so grateful for my colleagues for stepping up and giving us all this information, and especially for Sister Elizabeth for her amazing words. So I'm going to let's see. I'm going to start asking some of these questions, and I'll direct them to someone on the panel. And obviously, if you have more questions, please go ahead and write those in. This is a tough one. The first question we got is from Mary. She says, since most of us on this webinar live in the US, where about half of our taxes go to war in some way, and the Pentagon has failed all audits for the last 7 years, how do we find hope as we address the climatastrophe, Mary calls it, exacerbated by the military-industrial complex? That's a heavy question.
I think
Sister Beth,
it is, and it's a terrific question to bring in the expenditure of our corporate communal funds on military, on war and means of destruction. It's the same issue though that's facing us with the rollback of the Paris Climate Agreement, with drilling, with so many other things that have been mentioned already in this webinar. You say, how do you find hope? You just have to say, it looks like a disastrous situation, and in many ways it is. But the things that you can do by way of speaking out about where taxes go, about the federal budget, about need to care for creation for the poor, and so on. In other words, everything that I said applies to this question in spades. You know, to exercise the human power to resist regardless, and then in a faith way to know that God is walking with us. And so we have this transcendent inspiration to keep on going. I could say a lot more, but I think that's the essence of it is in terms of what I already mentioned, Yeah. You have to unmute yourself, Dan.
If I had a nickel, thank you. Please explain a bit more about generative action. If you look it up, it's all about artificial intelligence. So what do you mean, Sister Beth, by generative action?
I was thinking more biologically rather than of artificial intelligence. Like when you generate something in a hopeful way, you begin a process that something is being born and will grow and will have benefit in the future. In other words, you may die trying. You may not still be here to see it, but you generate something. So, for example, I think any parents or anyone who conceives and bears a child is being generative. Educators are generative, taking children or young minds or young adults and showing them some way to think about the world, to be in the world, to deal with the world that's powerful and ethical and good. That's generative. So all of the things that Sister Marianne Comfort was talking about, those are generative actions. The things that Anna was talking about, how to collaborate with other groups and do a pilgrimage, that's generative. I'm using it in a way, both starting biologically, but then saying sociologically and ecologically, anything we do to bring forth more life is generative.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And also, I would just say doing it together is really important. We can't do this alone. I'm thinking of the pilgrimages that we're launching this year. That's bringing folks together to have a common experience around a beautiful place or a place of environmental destruction or just walking around the parish grounds. It's something that we're doing together, experiencing together. I think that's also generative in the heart and in the soul, but also generative because we can then think together about some of these bigger things that we could possibly do to push back. I love in your talk about, you said resistance is a hopeful muscle to exercise. So I think that's what we're going to be doing a lot of, is resisting what's happening, particularly with the administration and hopefully not so much with Congress, but those are the types of things. So thank you. In the liturgical calendar, this weekend's gospel reading for the third week of Ordinary Time is Luke 4, the basis of the Jubilee message of the New Testament. The question is, how can parishes use these readings to support the international campaign for Jubilee 2025 debt cancellation? And then there's a couple of links in the question, and I'll let folks click on those. Any thoughts about that? Anyone? Marianne, Kayla, Sister Beth? Seems to me we need to build a whole program around that notion of Jubilee. Certainly debt cancellation is enormously important, because when countries, particularly low-income countries, have to pay debt, they don't have resources to adapt and mitigate climate. So, that has been a big issue for the Covenant. I know for Laudato Si movement and many other groups. A little late to do that this weekend, but certainly if our pastors kind of put the connections together between Jubilee year and Luke 4, that's a fairly easy connection to make. Marianne, did you want to jump in on that? I saw you.
Yeah. Just to say that I know our friends at Maryknoll. I'm here with Lisa from Maryknoll, and they're very involved in the Jubilee USA campaign, and so there's going to be a lot of engagement with that. And I will channel my good colleague, Sister Catherine Darcy, in Albany, New York, that those of you who are in New York State, there's a bill that is going to be going through the legislature again, that's really looking at addressing debt through all of the financial institutions that are based in New York State. So I would encourage people in New York State to really pay attention to that. That's a concrete thing you can be advocating for, to make those connections during this Jubilee year.
I would just jump in with one more thing, which isn't as legislative or as practical as what Marianne is doing, and we need that. I mean, those of us who don't understand or know could benefit from all of the instruction that will come in that direction. But I would like to add, because the question started out liturgically in the parish and Sunday observation. Anna put three jubilees that are up there. It's a Jubilee year, the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, and the 800th anniversary of the Canticle of the Creatures. But let me add one more. It's the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed, which when I say that, people look at me like I have 10 heads, but it was 325, the Council of Nicaea, so 1700 years ago. And when you look at that creed that we say every Sunday, most people just roll it off, but it starts with, I believe in God who created heaven and earth and everything visible and invisible. So there's creation right there. And we get to Jesus and he becomes part of creation. That's what that creed is emphasizing, becomes human being. And we get to the Spirit and we call the Spirit the Lord and giver of life. The giver of life, so every time we're destroying life, we're going against the work of God who gives life. So the whole creed, when you read it with a creation consciousness, is very supportive of everything that is being done in favor of creation ecologies, all the various aspects that are coming up in this discussion. So I would like to bring the creed in and not let us forget we have another resource. And it's a pretty powerful one. It's an old one.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks for that reminder. That's a good one. This is from Minette. Sister Elizabeth, I love your reference to the name of God being, I will be with you.
Yeah.
Could you recommend a place for us to read further on this? And thank you for your inspiring presentation.
Okay, thank you. There's a little book called The Problem of God. It's by John Courtney Murray. It's kind of old. It's a series of lectures he actually gave at Yale. But he has a whole chapter on this, and that was before Vatican II. He was on to this idea. But subsequently, a lot of scripture scholars, so I would suggest any commentary on Exodus that you would pick up that's been written recently will be discussing what is this name of God revealed to Moses. And it has that dynamic accompanying sense. I will be with you. I am a mysterious God out of burning bush that's not consumed. You can't contain me somehow, but nevertheless, I am with you because I love you and I will walk with you in the struggle. In other words, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a whole process. And as I always say when I teach this to students, Moses had to go engage the Pharaoh. There were 10 plagues. They was escaping. There was the Red Sea. There were on and on. It was a mess. And then they're 40 years in the desert. They're still not home. Um, it just doesn't work out. That's why I keep saying it's not magical. Yeah, you're in the struggle and you're in the conflict. But faith says that God is with you, and therefore there's a promise. And so people of faith who go that direction can have energy and inspiration and hope more than if you just look at the way the situation is and get discouraged and then say, well, the hell with it, I'm not going to try. So
Yeah, and that takes me back to something you also said earlier in your talk about, we are doing actions that we may never see come to fruition, right? So we're planting seeds that we may never see grow, and I think that's important. There's only so much we can do, right? We have limited time. We're limited people. Doing it together with others is always better. Walking the pilgrimage with others, knowing that God is walking with us, I think is super important, but also having a little humility and knowing that we can't solve all of this by ourselves. And that's why God is walking with us and encouraging us along the way. So I hope that this is going to be a tough time. And I'm glad for your intervention, Sister Beth. And that it gives me hope to kind of continue this work as well.
yeah.
Another
The
question.
reference, oh, I'm sorry. Let me just
No,
comment. The
please.
reference I made to slavery was very well, it was deliberately chosen because that's a terrible struggle in our own country and it's not over yet in terms of racism. And so look at how that struggle went on and the small gains and then the setbacks. And we're having more setbacks even in this administration. lack of DEI personnel and so on now happening. So you just keep pushing. As all the people I've quoted said, it's because it's the right thing to do, because you love the world and you want to push something forward. And if you don't, it won't go forward. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Great. This is from Sister Rose Therese. Her senators and her representative are very much against climate change. How do we talk to them about this? What do we do to challenge them and to help change their minds?
That is, again, such a wonderful question, and it's such a tough thing to do. Um, I mean, to be a little bit glib, I would say just point to Los Angeles right now. Uh, this morning, CNN reported on the destruction of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. All the fish species, because of the warming of the ocean, going belly up. I mean, you just look around to what's happening, and even if you don't trust science, I mean, because there's a very anti-scientific attitude that goes along with that. You don't just trust your own eyes, see what's happening with the climate, know how many creatures used to exist on this earth that when you were born, I would say to my senator, that don't exist here anymore. They've gone extinct because of what we human beings have done. In other words, try to bring in examples. That's the first way. You're never going to convince people if they think it's all a conspiracy that climate change is changing. But say use your common sense and look at what's happening. That's how I would start anyway.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
I could
Kayla, I
jump
saw that
in.
you wanted to jump. Oh, Kayla and then Marianne.
Okay, great. I used to work for a diocese and would frequently get really mean emails from people who disagreed with like a bishop's statement on Catholic social teaching, whatever. And my director at the time, who might be on this call, I don't know, told me to handle it pastorally. And so that's always been my mantra. And so when you're meeting with people who might be in opposition to you, it's important as Christians to handle it pastorally. And you're not going to change their mind just by spitting facts. While the facts are important, it's by building relationship and treating them with respect. So that's one thing. And then that's also another benefit of us moving towards some state level stuff, because I see my state level like elected officials at the grocery store. I used to share a parish with my old like representative on the state level, and so it's easier to build a relationship with people on the more local level as well.
Thanks. Great, Kayla. Marianne, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is bring your personal experiences. I mean, they can argue with you over facts and figures, but when you share your own, why you're deeply concerned about climate change, how it's impacting you, how it's impacting your neighbors, how it might be impacting friends and family in really ravaged areas of the country or the world, that's where you can start having the conversations. And one of the things we were saying today on our Interfaith Coalition is we can't write anybody off. We don't have that luxury. We need to talk to everyone and go in with open minds and open hearts and engage people with where they're at and gently nudge them along through these respectful, personal conversations.
Great. Thank you very much. A couple other comments before we close. Marie, I love this quote from Marie Constantine. Maybe it's not a quote, but it's really insightful. I don't know of a place where God calls us to success. Do you? He does call us to being faithful. I think that's really insightful. And then another one, let's see. Yeah, I don't know what happened to, maybe it was answered earlier, but
I answered it
I
and
certainly
said
love
yes.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Kayla.
It said it's so important to embrace the synodal dialogue in our church.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. I think the synodal process can really help us get at some of these questions as well, because we're doing that together and we're being honest and open, and especially for people who don't agree with us, I think we need to be in conversation with them, and the synodal process is a great way to do that. Any last words, any final comments, especially from you, Sister Beth, that you want to leave us with? You've left us with such a treasure of ideas and inspiration today. Is there anything more that you'd like to say?
Yes, let me quote Paul again as I ended my talk.
Wonderful.
Does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit given to us. And how that love works itself out is new in our day, in terms of creation, in terms of collaboration with one another, and speaking dialogically with others, and so on. But it's still the same powerful love of God, and she will not be quenched.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank everyone, our panelists, and all of you who have participated and sent such very thoughtful questions. There's a lot going on in the chat. We'll try to capture some of that and perhaps answer some of the questions that were listed there as well. This has been recorded, and we will send the recording to you as soon as it's ready. Everybody who registered should look for an email from us with the recording for this. There's a lot here, especially with Sister Elizabeth's intervention. So I know I'm going to go back and listen to it time and again. Thank you all. Have a great day. Chin up. We are hopeful people. We are marching forward with God by our side. So thank you, and have a great afternoon or a great morning. Bye-bye.